Hi, welcome everyone. We're a little bit early, so we'll give it a minute before we kick off. But yeah, thanks very much for joining us so far. Thanks for being early as well.
Hey Neil, how you doing?
Ben, Tris, how we going?
Very
Good, thanks.
well.
That's the way. That's the way. Look, everyone. Again, thank you very much for joining. We'd love to hear where you're from in the webinar chat.
I get to boast. I'm coming from glorious sunny Brisbane today, Neil.
I am coming from downtown rainy Newcastle.
Oh.
It's not much better in Sydney, I can tell you. It's a miracle to get into work without getting too wet. We've got a lot of destinations here. We've got regional New South Wales, we've got Brisbane.
Dubbo. I grew up in Dubbo. Hey, Donna.
Victorian.
Awesome. Blue Mountains, Central Coast. Perth. All right, I think that wins for the furthest away.
Goodness, that'd be early in Perth, wouldn't it?
Yeah, early morning.
Thanks for joining. That's commitment. We appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, we'll give it another 30 seconds and then we'll dive in. There's still a ton of people streaming in. I can see the little counter going up quickly and quickly. Awesome. Well, we might get started. For anyone that's got colleagues or friends that haven't joined yet, we are recording this and we will send it out to everyone, but I'll cover that off again in a little bit. But let's get started. So thank you everyone and welcome to the Quick Claim and ShiftCare webinar on tracking funding periods and tracking data and resource planning. So super excited for this. We've got some amazing experts and Ben and Tris joining us. Lots of content to get through, but we will save quite a bit of time at the end for questions. And yeah, jump onto the next slide. So my name's Neil Jamieson. I'm the Sales Operations Manager here at ShiftCare. We're a leading care management software for the NDIS and aged care space. And joining us is Ben Roswick, the COO for QuickClaim, and Tris Peters, the content marketing specialist. Super happy to have those guys here, and they're going to be running the webinar for us today. On to the next slide for us, Tris. Thanks. And yeah, over to you, Tris.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Neil, for that kind introduction. And it's great to be here with everyone today to be unpacking the introduction of funding periods. And what we really want to do is offer some really practical tips to how to ease that transition so that you can all continue claiming with confidence. Before we begin, we would like to just quickly acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to the people, the cultures, and the elders, past and present. We have just a few points of housekeeping, as Neil mentioned. So firstly, please feel free to use the webinar chat function in Zoom to ask any questions that you might have. We'll endeavour to answer these as we go, but we do have dedicated time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And we'll also collate anything that we don't get to and send our responses and answers by email after the conclusion of today's webinar. Secondly, if you do have any technical issues, please feel free to email me at tris@quickclaim.com.au. As thirdly, we'll also be sending all those slides and, as Neil mentioned, our webinar recording to you should you have any technological issues. So feel free to save that email and flick me any questions or concerns, technical issues that you might have, and we'll bring you back up to speed. In terms of quick agenda for today, we are obviously going to be unpacking funding periods and what they mean in practice for you and your business, specifically when it comes to claiming, and then exploring in some detail this concept of plan utilization, how it works in practice, and what best practice is. We at QuickClaim see plan utilization as one of the primary tools in the repertoire for providers to get through these transitions of funding periods and have a lot of experience in supporting providers when it comes to utilizing plans of participants so that it works for both the provider and the participant alike. We also will be covering some of the ethics and privacy considerations that come with plan utilization. And then, as we've said a couple of times, we'll be rounding off today with a Q&A where Ben and I will be answering all questions you have around funding periods and plan utilization. So without further ado, because there is a lot to unpack, we're going to dive straight in, and I'm going to hand the reins to Ben to detail what these new funding periods look like.
Thanks, Tris, and thanks, Neil, again for having both Tris and myself here. It's really great to be able to join you guys. And just quickly, we really love the ShiftCare product. We've had so many of our clients who've moved on to it tell us great things about it, and it's a real, it's really nice to be able to work with you guys. And I know that we're working towards a tighter integration between our products. Just for anyone who isn't aware of what QuickClaim does, we're a billing solution specialist. That is all we do. We're very much into the numbers, the financial side of NDIS. We have an API license into the portal, which just makes accessing it and filing your claims, getting your data back out of the portal just that much easier. Okay, cool. So let's jump into funding periods. I'm sure anyone who's been in this sector for more than just a few months, but I'm sure everyone who's been a lot longer than that is used to the NDIS changing things on us. I personally, I've only been with the business for a few years, and I've already got regulatory fatigue. It's a never-ending race to keep up with what they're doing. But the reason that funding periods have been brought in was, at least theoretically, to make it a bit easier for both providers and participants to sort of smooth out their spending over the life of their plans. And what's happened is that we've gone from here's your whole budget, now just try and spend it judiciously over the next 12 or 24 months, to saying, okay, here's part of your budget. So we've introduced this concept of a funding period where instead of, as I said, instead of releasing the entire budget, you might release a quarter of it. You might have quarterly budgets, or you might even have monthly budgets. So, for SIL, for example, we've got this concept of monthly budgets coming in, and there are exceptions, but roughly it's breaking down that budget into 1/12 for the monthly budget and saying, okay, try and go and spend this 1/12 of a budget this month, and then next month we'll release some more budget for you to go and spend. The idea, as I said, being to sort of smooth things out over the length of a plan. Obviously, in practice, it doesn't always work that way, and I know from what Chris has told me and from lots of both of our clients and participant stories, that funding periods obviously introduce just another level of complexity for them to be able to deal with. But that's just the reality we have to deal with. It's not going away. The NDIA seem to be very adamant that this is the way forward. So we just need to learn how to sort of best handle this. And with good data and good systems, you definitely can adjust to this new reality. It's going to be introduced slowly over time. So I think probably most of you by now have seen at least one or two of your participants move on to plans with funding periods. It's been with us for just over 2 months now. Certainly, we've seen most of our clients have to adjust to this new reality. It's not impossible to deal with, as I said. It's another little bit of complexity, but once you get into the rhythm of things, dealing with this is definitely doable. Okay, so one thing that I really want to dive into a bit more, just if you want to move on to the next slide, it will help illustrate this point. So funding periods, as I said, the idea is to break down the whole budget into sort of shorter periods. And I've got here an illustration of what this would look like for a still budget that has been broken down into monthly periods. So as I said, usually the first month is actually a bit front-loaded, knowing that a lot of costs associated with setting up a plan come up front. And obviously for some categories like assistive tech, that's completely front-loaded. So they'll just be like, here's the lump sum. But for still, it's fairly evenly split out. And the way it will work is that, whatever you get in that first month, you'll go and spend, or you'll design your budget so that you're spending it obviously so that you're using just 1 month's worth of budget each month. But anything that you don't spend in that first period does get rolled over to the subsequent period and so on. Anything that's still remaining after the second period is obviously rolled into the third period, which is what I've got illustrated here. But importantly, when you get to the end of your plan, nothing's going to be carried over to the next plan. So you still need to design your plan or your spending to be in line with what is in that monthly budget and that overall plan. So, there's still the reality that you need to be aiming for as close to 100% consumption as possible, so that you're not overspending. You don't want to be in a situation where you're exhausted in your budget and you're either having to wait or your provider is in a position where they're having to fund the shortfall until the next bit of budget is released. But similarly, from a participant point of view, you don't want to be in a situation where you're getting to the end of your plan and you still have unspent budget, because what's going to happen is that the NDIS are going to look at that, say, hey, you didn't spend 10% of your budget, maybe we'll cut that by 10% for your next plan, right? So, people tend to look at, particularly, given that most of the people I talk to are providers, people tend to look at it mostly from the overconsumption point of view. But don't forget that from the participant point of view, underconsumption is just as problematic. And as service providers, we're here to provide the best possible service. And that means that if you've got a budget for $100,000, spending that $100,000 is kind of your obligation. You want to be designing it so that you're giving people as much service as they're entitled to. Okay, so I think let's move on to the next slide, Chris. And I might hand it back over to you at this point.
Yeah, sounds good. I also just want to very quickly echo that sentiment that you shared there, Ben, around the responsibility of ensuring that participants don't underspend. So I am happy to admit I'm an actual NDIS participant myself, and sometimes I think this narrative is around overspending is the big thing that we need to be afraid of as providers, but underspending is as important to avoid because of the complexities that it leads to participants at plan reassessments, going and collating all that evidence to prove, no, I actually do need that amount. There's reasons why I didn't spend it. So participants really value the support of providers to ensure that they're not underspending as much as overspending. So in terms of funding periods, as I touched on at the very beginning, it's a very, very big structural shift with how NDIS plans are built. And there's the complexities that Ben alluded to and the challenges that this places on the cash flow of your business. And so what we want to do today is just really unpack plan utilization as sort of the key to ensuring your business's sustainability through this transition to funding periods. So to do this, it's just very quickly important for us to define that concept so that we're all on the same page. And so when we're referring to plan utilization, we're very simply just talking about an NDIS participant using their funds within their plan at the right pace. So avoiding both underspending and overspending, as Ben mentioned. And again, just to reiterate that important concept that plan utilization is about helping the participant get the most out of the NDIS plan. As a result, the certainty as a business that you know exactly that you're going to be able to invoice for services that you deliver. So in terms of achieving plan utilization, there's an importance placed on obtaining data to know whether a participant is on track or not. And what we're going to explore now is just the ways in which you can obtain that data. And then once you've obtained it, different ways in which you can determine whether overspending or underspending is taking place, and then everything is working as it should. So within QuickClaim, we see the data most commonly being attained from support coordinators, plan managers, and then also NDIS provider APIs, which is, as Ben mentioned at the beginning, something that we have a great deal of expertise in dealing with. So we'll unpack the NDS APIs first up, and I'll hand the reins back to you, Ben, to do that.
Oh, thank you. So I guess maybe I should explain what an API is before I sort of go any further here. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's just a way of having computers connect to each other to transfer data. I mean, that's the easiest way to explain it. And the NDIS has these APIs, so it's these data feeds available. You need to either yourself get a certificate to go and get access to that API, or you can access it through what's called an aggregator. So QuickClaim is an example of an aggregator. So that just means that we can provide the API data to third parties without you having to then go and get certified, which means go through all the cybersecurity due diligence, etc., to be certified by what's called the Digital Partnerships Office, who are the office who are responsible for regulating or managing these APIs. So let's just assume that you've managed to get hold of APIs either through an aggregator or yourself, and you want to get to that data that relates to budgets, plans, etc. The first thing you're going to need to do, and this applies to anyone, whether you're a support coordinator, plan manager, etc., you need to get consent from participants to be able to access that data. And that's a really important concept. Obviously, at the end of the day, this data relates to individuals. So there are always privacy and ethical concerns. So you want to make sure that you're getting consent before you access that data. In fact, the NDIS won't give you data without that consent piece being completed. You've probably all seen it, but there are consent forms available online through the NDIS. As soon as that's completed, then the data becomes released through those APIs. So what exactly are we tracking when we get that data? We're tracking the total and remaining budget and the plan start and end date. Get a sense for, are we consuming that budget at the right pace? So that means, for example, if I'm halfway through a plan, so I'm halfway between the start and end date, and I've used half the budget, then I know I'm roughly on pace. My utilization is optimal at that point. And similarly, if I've only used half of the quarter of the budget and I'm halfway through, I'm underspending. If I've used 3/4 of the budget, that means I'm at risk of exhausting the budget before I get to the end of that plan. And I guess I'm using the word plan, but actually, in the context of what we're talking about today, the funding period, we really want to be talking about it in that context. We want to say, for any particular funding period, are we using the budget at the right pace? We're halfway through our funding period. We want to make sure that we're using half the budget allocated to that particular period, and vice versa. Right? Okay, so as with any piece of data, when you're using it, you need to be aware of, well, what does that data mean and what are the limitations of the meaning? So obviously data itself is raw, it's context unaware. And what I mean by that is it doesn't understand your circumstances. So, for example, when Tris had an incident once and broke his leg, he needed additional care. And obviously you've all seen situations where your participants have been in a situation where they need additional care above and beyond what's in their normal plan. And a funding period, because it's not taking into account any of those variations, it obviously is going to show that you're over consuming your budget. So those are situations where you obviously need to be applying for a variation, a change in circumstance, as I think the nomenclature is, in order to get the sort of budget aligned to the rate of spending. But under normal circumstances, like, under sort of in the longer term, or like if there's no change in circumstances, then, knowing simply looking at the statistics will actually provide you something informative. And actually, Chris, if you move on to the next slide, this is how at QuickClaim we encourage our clients to look at the data. So what we've got here, and that diagonal line that's running through the middle of the chart there, the dotted diagonal line, that is what optimal spending looks like. So I'm spending at the same pace at which time is moving forward. So, for every 10% movement forward in time, I'm spending 10% of the budget, right? So what I've highlighted in first in red is people who are underspending. So this is an example of where I've still got a lot of budget left, but not a lot of time left, which means I'm at risk of finishing a plan and still having a meaningful budget remaining, which, as Chris highlighted earlier, is a real problem for participants, because it means they're at risk of losing their funding under the next plan. But it also means, more fundamentally, that we're not delivering the service that we promised, that the NDIS assessed that participant as being in need of. So underspending really is a problem too. And if we're looking at from a purely commercial point of view, underspend is a problem too, because these are revenue opportunities, right? These are examples where you could be delivering more services than you are. And the same concept actually applies to service bookings, but in the case of a service booking, you have actually promised to deliver a certain amount of spending. You reserved that budget, and you've prevented other people from delivering those services. So that these are real examples where you are kind of failing in your obligations to the participant. And whilst PACE budgets obviously aren't as rigid as service bookings in that you're not preventing other people from spending it, you've kind of promised that in your service agreement that you would be delivering these services. On the other side of that diagonal line, we've got overspending highlighted, and this is the converse. It's where you're spending budget too fast, and you're consequently at risk of exhausting budget, which I think for most providers, they'll have come across this at some point in their lifetimes, and obviously you're at risk at that point of being in financial problems where you're having to deliver services because you're ethically or morally obliged to deliver those services, but you don't have access to budget to fund that service, right? And obviously there are, that's a reality, I'm sure, for most of you. You've all come across this before, where you know that you're not going to get paid for it, at least in the short term. And you're either going to have to wait until additional budget is released, you're going to have to apply for a change in circumstance, whatever it may be. But so obviously this is equally problematic. You need to be concerned about, hey, if we continue delivering services at this rate, we're going to run out of budget. And part of these Section 33 changes is to really encourage, well, I mean, technically, it's really the responsibility of plan managers and support coordinators, but at the end of the day, it's the service providers who are going to bear the financial brunt of it, not to overspend, right? The NDIS is really adamant about wanting to cut out intra-plan inflation, and the way they want to do that more than anything else is by ensuring that people aren't overspending. Obviously, that was the whole, well, at least one of the premises of funding periods. But from a purely fiduciary responsibility point of view, you need to be keeping track of this too, to make sure that you're not at risk of being at a point where you don't have funds to deliver the services, and you're left with either a very tricky conversation to have with the participants, or you're left in a financial hole. Okay, maybe let's move on to the next slide.
Very quickly before you do that,
yeah.
Ben, I'd like to share that lived experience lens. And you mentioned when I broke my leg and was requiring further supports to support me through that period. It was actually a provider who noticed that I was overspending, who alerted me to that fact, which then encouraged me to go and then lodge a change of circumstances. So it was through the due diligence of a provider that we actually recognized that they were tracking the data appropriately, utilizing my plan, that I was then able to go and lodge that circumstances to get the better supports that I needed. So it's just a nice example of it in practice, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as I said, even though it's maybe technically the responsibility of coordinators or plan managers, the reality is that providers who are at the call point, they've got the stronger relationship with participants, and you're going to bear the financial burden one way or the other.
Yeah, perfect. So we've very much alluded to the reasons that plan utilization is so important, but we think it's still worthwhile just to capture these sort of 4 key principles as to its real benefit. So I touched on just in that example I provided around enhanced participant outcomes. So aligning services more closely with needs and goals. But in terms of your own provider efficiency, it ensures that you have better resource management, and then you reduce your administrative burden. So, it's often a very complicated, difficult thing to be and working with participants in terms of schedule supports and tracking all that data. And so by doing this at the very beginning, you're going to be reducing that burden that you might face later on when there might potentially be issues with overspending, underspending, and impacts on cash flow. The third principle is just around improved compliance and reporting. So as we mentioned around underspending, it is incredibly difficult at the end of a plan to go and then ask for that amount if you've not used it in the previous plan. And so the compliance and reporting is really valuable, that you're demonstrating value and effective use of funds. That can also support a participant go and request for more support if it's necessary, such as was the case when I broke my leg. And just that fourth principle around business sustainability and growth. So by identifying if a participant is underspending, you might be able to then move your workforce around to where they might be needed more appropriately. So you can make decisions at an organizational level to support your workforce, but then also that flows on to the participants and what they need in their day-to-day lives to achieve their NDIS goals. So we've covered these sort of as we've gone, but the 4 principles sort of hold true for much of the conversation around plan utilization. Back to you, Ben.
Oh, thanks, Chris. So I think we've covered bits and pieces of this, but let's talk about in practice what we're doing with this data. So I think there's quite a few areas within a typical service provider organization that would benefit from having this type of data available to them. In particular, you want to have the managers of frontline staff, or at least the people in charge of both service delivery, rostering, etc., have this available, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is to be able to optimize service delivery so that you're never facing a situation where you're over or under servicing. And obviously that requires both liaising with participants themselves to be able to say, hey, this is what we think is going to give you the best possible outcome for the budget that you have. But also means that when you're doing that rostering, that you're allocating staff in a way that's appropriate to people's budget, and to be keeping track of that, to make sure that, hey, last week when we delivered that service, it turned out that we missed it this week, or whatever it may be. So that means that we've got that little bit of extra budget that we can deliver next week. Or similarly, we had to go in an extra couple of times last week. We need to be cognizant of the fact that going forward, we either need to reduce what we can allocate or apply for that change in circumstance. And I guess that leads to the point that it's also the people who are liaising with the agency who also need to have access to that data. So if you're aware of your participants consuming budget too fast, obviously either alerting those participants to that fact, to helping them raise a change in circumstance. So whoever's liaising with the agency, and usually there'll be someone who has a good relationship with the agency who can understand how that gets done. That's another important person within an organization to have access to that data. And then lastly, your billing team obviously needs to be able to understand what's going on with plan utilization too. Because as I said, there's two sort of, there's commercial implications in both directions for how you're utilizing plans. If you're under consuming, that represents a revenue increase opportunity. I know that it always feels a bit dirty talking about money in the context of NDIS, but the reality is, you are there to help generate revenue for your service provider, for your organization. Even if you're a non-for-profit, keeping your staff employed, keeping your organization in the black is kind of a moral imperative too. We're all familiar with the sheer volume of providers who are struggling financially, and if you're leaving budget on the table at the end of the day, that yes, it's a purely commercial opportunity, but it's also a sort of imperative on you to be like, okay, with this organization, we need every cent we can. We could be delivering extra services. We could be keeping our staff better employed by using that additional budget. And similarly, from the other point of view, like when you're over consuming budget, you're at risk of running out of funds, and you need to be able to plan for that financially. That if you do apply for a change in circumstance, and I saw there was a question about this, it might take time for it to come through, right? And you need to be able to say, okay, there's a risk that we are going to run out of funds, or that we are at least going to have to wait until the next quarterly budget comes in, the next funding period is released. So the billing team needs to be acutely aware of what's going on here too. So it's those three teams, rostering, service delivery, whoever's liaising with the agency, and billing. You all need to be aware of how budgets are being consumed, of what the rate of plan utilization is, to be able to effectively run your organization. Okay, we got next, please. Okay, so just very quick, and I think a lot of this goes without saying, but I also feel like it's our responsibility to say it anyway. At the end of the day, as I said, this is sensitive data. How much someone has in their budget, and the rate at which it's being consumed is personal data. It comes under the APPs, the Australian Privacy Principles. You need to make sure that only the people within an organization who need to have access to this do have access to it, and similarly that it's not being disclosed more broadly within the organization or externally as well. And you also need to be sensitive to how you're acquiring it in the first place. So, obviously there's that consent piece that I talked about earlier. You need to have consent to access it, but obviously that consent needs to be acquired in a responsible way too. And that's, as I said, given that it's in the interest of participants or providers to know what's in their budget so that it can be spent optimally. If you explain it to participants in that way, or if you explain it, in a way that they can see the benefit of you having that data, that I haven't talked to a participant yet who said, no, I don't want them to know it when it's properly explained. So I think, yes, it's sensitive, but with the right explanation, this can definitely be acquired. And what we're seeing now is that consent is more frequently being built into service agreements. So when you sign that service agreement, you simultaneously sign a consent document that says, yes, I'm happy for you to be told what's in my plan, what's in my budget, which means that you can be getting that data from the coordinators, from plan managers, from the agency, depending on who's managing that plan. But yes, it's an important part of how that data is acquired. Similarly, once you have that data, obviously it needs to be held in a secure fashion within your systems. It's tempting to want to be able to track these things in Excel files, or Google Docs, or whatever it may be. And those files have a tendency to fall outside of I guess the sort of standard places where files are kept. So we need to be really cognizant of the fact that this data is sensitive and needs to be stored in a secure fashion, either in your sort of organization's protected cloud, or within software that itself has security measures in place. Obviously, that's something that's very important when you are talking to vendors about how your data is being stored, you need to ensure that A, it's being kept onshore. All NDIS data needs to be kept in Australia. So if you're a Google user or an AWS user or a Microsoft user, you need to be sure that that data is being kept onshore. And also, you should be asking, your vendors what their security measures are to help keep that data secure. Are they certified for ISO? Are they certified for SOC 2, whatever it may be, to make sure that they know what they're doing with your data. And the very last thing I want to mention is, again, around consent, ensuring transparency, ensuring that people know how you're going to use that data if you do acquire it from them or from their support coordinators or plan managers. And again, this is really just a matter of explaining things properly, that you're using their data in their best interest as well as your own best interest. Getting 100% of a budget spent at the end of a plan worked out well for everyone. So if you do a good job of explaining why you need that data and being transparent about how you're going to use it, it's very unlikely that you're going to get any kickback, but it is an obligation. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. We are very close to wrapping up sort of the presentation of the webinar. And we just want to finish with sort of 3 key takeaways for you that we hope we've shared across the course of the past half hour. So the first one is just around, as we've touched on a number of times, the very simple fact that funding periods are dramatically changing how plans are built and how you claim. And so just on that point, for any participant that is going for a plan reassessment or anyone that's new to the scheme, they will automatically switch to funding periods. So within your own CRMs, you need to recognize if when a participant's plan ends and recognize that once they switch over to a new plan, you're going to have to recognize that the funding periods will be in place and that will impact how you claim and why plan utilization is so important for those participants going forwards. So the second one is just around plan utilization data, helping you inform decisions at all levels of your organization. So it's not just about supporting the participant, but helping you structurally look at where your workforce needs to go, how they need to operate, and then help you make business decisions. And just lastly, we've touched on this again a number of times as well, but both participants and service providers benefit from plan utilization. I think we often think about plan utilization in a business sense around sustainability, but at the end of the day, it's ensuring a participant is achieving those outcomes that they want, the goals as outlined in their plans, and that's a really important thing to recognize as well. So those are sort of the 3 takeaways. What I'm going to do now is throw back to Neil for a Q&A. Should anyone have any questions around funding periods and plan utilization?
Awesome. Thanks very much, Tris, and thanks, Ben. That was super informative. We've got a couple of questions come through, but please, if anyone would like to ask any more questions, just make sure you're using the Q&A so we can keep track of them. First question is one Ben sort of answered, but we'll ask it again, and I don't think there is a specific answer that we can give, but if there is a change of circumstances which need more funding, this normally takes months to approve. What is the guarantee the NDIA will approve it quickly? Otherwise, it will hold up invoicing. Can we give any guarantees from the NDIA?
I think we all know the answer.
Yeah, sorry, Ben.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, yeah, as you said, we touched on it earlier. At the end of the day, there's no guarantee. I think we all, we're all kind of aware of that, even though we'd like to think that there was. So that just highlights the importance of having this data in the hands of your billing team. Knowing that yes, there's going to be potentially a 2 or 3 month gap until we get paid for these services, knowing when that next funding period is going to be released, and knowing what what levers you can pull within the organization, or what financial levers you can pull to sort of fund that potential gap, and making sure that it's not a systematic problem. I think for most providers, having one or two participants temporarily funded by internal funds is probably manageable. But if it's systematic, that's when you really run into trouble. So being able to track that data systematically, to have a chart like what we were looking at before, to know, hey, these participants are all at risk of exhausting their budget, and avoiding situations like that, getting it back into the hands of rostering and service delivery staff, so that you are not going to exhaust budget systematically. That's what's really important.
Yeah.
Because for any one participant, you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't guarantee what the NDIA will do, but if we have access to all of the data, then at least we can make informed decisions going forward.
I might also add, sorry, Daniel, funnily enough, I'm going through a change of circumstances as we speak. So although we're seeing these decisions slow drastically, it's funnily enough one of the ways in which the NDIA is curbing growth is by slowing the decisions around change of circumstances. They still have to commit to responding to the participants' request within, I think it's 21 days. So at least within 21 days, you should get a gauge as to whether the NDIA is open to having a conversation with the participant around changing their plan. Again, that's no guarantee, but it does give you some sort of timeline. See 21 days if the plan's even going to be varied or not. But then, yeah, and once you get to a change of circumstance, if it is approved, who knows what they're going to do? They might change some things here and there. But yeah, there still is a commitment within 21 days to get a response as to whether they'll even look at it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, next question. What can be done, and this is a good one, what can be done regarding participants using independence without you knowing and therefore chewing up funding that wasn't planned for? Again, if we can answer this question, that would be great.
Yeah, again, this is a risk, but it's why you have service agreements, I guess, in the first place, to minimize this risk. At the end of the day, someone can break their service agreement. That's the tricky one to handle. What do you do about that when someone is in breach? But without service bookings, there's no way to actually prevent that happening, to prevent a situation where you are delivering services and you run out of funds without being aware of it, with the only exception that with things like API data, you can be doing daily refreshes of people's budgets. That's really the beauty of having an API-based connection as opposed to having to go for a human each time. You can be saying to the budget API, how much is left, how much is left, how much is left, 100 times a day, to find out what is being spent and make sure that you at least minimize the situation, or minimize the probability of having someone else spending funds without you being aware of it. The other thing that we strongly encourage is more frequent billing. Again, it doesn't eliminate the possibility that you have funds exhausted, but it does reduce the impact. If you're billing once a month, right, you've got a whole month's worth of services where you're unsure whether you're going to get that through or not. But if you're billing daily, you're cutting that down to 1 day. And obviously there's a sweet spot somewhere in between for most providers. Like I don't have the resources to do it daily, but maybe you can do it weekly. So increased frequency of billing is another way to reduce the impact of this happening.
Awesome. Great answer. Thanks, Ben. Sorry, Tris, did you want to add to that? I saw you come off mute there.
No, I was sneezing. I'm so sorry. I muted myself just in time. All good.
Yeah, thank you. Next question. So when a client's plan rolls over, should we create a new funding or edit the new funding on ShiftCare? So that's me. So currently the best way to do it is to create new funding. So we're looking at incorporating that into the funding model. So you should see some updates coming from us in the next couple of months. But yeah, create a new funding block for it. So happy to answer that question there for you. And sorry, just for context on that, ShiftCare has a funding tracking model, nowhere near as advanced as what QuickClaim has, but essentially it just tracks the balance of a fund according to the invoices that are submitted through ShiftCare. So just that standalone function. What if the client does not wish to share their plan with you? How can providers track the funding periods?
It's another tricky one. I mean, again, it comes back to those service agreements. Obviously the service agreement itself is a promise that there is funding coming from somewhere that will pay for those services. But it's another reason why we encourage consent to be included in service agreements up front. But if a participant doesn't want to share their wider budget with you, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not your information to acquire. It's the participant's choice at the end of the day. There's nothing you can do. All you know is what's in your service agreement. Hey, the person has promised to pay for the services that I'm delivering, and that's all you can know unless there is consent. But it does go back to that topic that I was discussing earlier, where if you do a good job of explaining why you want to know their budget, there's an increased chance that they will close that they will provide you with consent. And I think, Tris hammered this home earlier, where participants, there is obviously maybe this inclination that I don't want my provider to know all these things, etc. But if you explain to them, hey, if we don't consume this budget, you're at risk of losing it for your next plan, then there's a much better chance they'll see it from your point of view and they'll agree to share that data with you. So there's an obligation, obviously, at the end of the day, for you to convince them that, but they're under no obligation to provide that data to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben and Tris. That was all the questions that we had in there. We will collate all this information and share it out with everyone that's registered to the webinar. Tris, Ben, if anyone has any questions specifically around the QuickClaim product, how can they reach out to you?
Actually, sorry to interrupt, Neil. There are a couple more questions. I don't know if we have time to cover them now, or.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah, go scrolling down. I saw there were a few more.
My bad. I've got that hidden. Excellent.
Yeah. We might. Well, there's quite a few, so we might try and race through them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the first question is around public holidays and how that impacts funding periods, etc. Which is a tricky one. And we've seen this handled in a few different ways. As I said, usually, but not always, funding periods will be slightly front-loaded. And the idea is that front-loading will help reduce the impact of a slightly greater rate of consumption early on. It doesn't completely eliminate the possibility that, hey, in month one, we had 3 public holidays because they happened to start the day before Christmas. And, we just didn't have the budget in month one. But really, apart from month one, and apart from having to start the plan right before Christmas, it should be unlikely that public holidays meaningfully impact you from a funding period point of view. Because remember, after that first month or that first quarter, there's going to be whatever budget there was is going to be rolled over into second funding period. And by the time you've got to that second funding period, there should be enough days between the periods that you've had that averaging effect. That unless, as I said, you start on the day before Christmas and it's a really exceptional circumstance, public holidays shouldn't meaningfully impact you on funding periods. But it is something to be aware of, given that it can lead to a slightly uneven distribution of funds. So the next question is regarding APIs. What is and isn't available For unregistered providers, that's an easy one to answer. If you're not registered, you can't access it, unfortunately. Obviously there's been talk about light registration going forward. That's going to be compulsory for everyone. We haven't been told yet what that's going to mean for API access. I'm not even sure that the DPO have decided what that means. I'm willing to bet they haven't. But as things are right now, unregistered providers just can't access. What do we got? Clients in still accommodations, they also have independent providers providing community access shifts. For instance, this is tricky. Plan managers have a big role to play here as well as support. I think you've kind of answered your own question here. That's exactly right. The plan managers and support coordinators do have a big role to play whenever you've got more than one provider providing services. Particularly in still, but certainly in general providers too. And it's really important that you set something up with the support coordinator or plan manager to have access to their data. The vast majority of big plan managers certainly, and even some of the smaller ones, will have access to API data. So there's no reason why they can't be making that data available to you with greater frequency. So speak to your plan manager about getting that data made available either through a portal or through API access to your own software. Because yes, you definitely need to be keeping track of it on a near daily basis to ensure that what you think is remaining in the budget is actually remaining in the budget, because that information asymmetry is what leads to problems most of the time, where you think you've got some amount available, but it turns out that it's a different amount available.
Awesome.
Neil, there's a question from Rhonda, if you want to take that. Yep.
Yeah, I'll grab that one. So the questions, will ShiftCare invoice within each participant's individual quarterly dates? The way that the invoicing works in ShiftCare is you select the period of time. So the answer is yes, but it is entirely up to you to select the period of time. So like Ben was saying, if you wanted to invoice daily, you can invoice daily. If you want to do it weekly, monthly, etc. Yes, it will. And then the next one's for me as well. Sounds like it's more like a support question. So ShiftCare has the ability to list price books or services against a client by default. So James, if you want to reach out to support, we'll be able to help you out with that, or just email Neil at ShiftCare, and we can get you some help with that. There's just a couple of questions in the webinar chat as well. Let me go and cover these. So the last one is, with the NDIS API and quitclaim, does that mean providers would have access to the actual funding levels of all participants regardless of the plan type, i.e. providers have access to funding levels of participants who have NDIS managed funds in PACE?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's actually a surprisingly controversial one. If you ask the NDIS and you ask the DPO about what providers should have access to, you're going to get conflicting answers, unfortunately. Our experience has been similarly confusing. Providers sometimes get data across both agency and plan managed. Sometimes providers get nothing. It's very hard to know. What I can say is that plan managers and support coordinators with consent will definitely have that data available to them. And it will be across both plan and agency managed in the case of support coordinators. I wish I could give you a really definitive answer about the funding that you can get access to. But as I said, unfortunately, we get conflicting answers ourselves from the agency. What I would say is that we are making a concerted push for the agency to make this data available to providers. I personally find it saying that provider can be charged with the safety and care of a participant, but they can't be given charge of their financial details when consent exists. Why should plan managers and support coordinators be able to access something when the agency cannot provide it to you? I don't understand that. But anyway, to go back to the original question, like I can't give you a definitive answer. Sometimes you get the data, sometimes you don't. But plan managers and support coordinators will definitely have access to it. So you're better off starting with them at least.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And then there was just another question on the funding from ShiftCare. I'll just quickly take that. So currently you can choose the period of time that you track funding over, and historically it's obviously been 12 months, and that's typically what you would choose. So under this new section, when you're creating the funding model or the funding tracking function in ShiftCare, you would pick it for the period of time, whether it be a month, a quarter, etc. We are doing some work on that to make that more accommodating. So it's included for the full 12 months and then broken down into the billing period, or the period that it's set for that particular client. And we should have something to update everyone on in the coming months for that. So thanks for that question, Shavini. Let me make sure I've scrolled to the very bottom. I think we are all out of questions there, and let me just check the questions. I just shared my email address for anyone that has any questions relating to ShiftCare. Please also use the support chat function in app. They can come back a lot quicker than I can on email, but more than happy to help. And if we need to jump on a Zoom with anyone, we can as well. Double check the questions. Yep, we're good. Ben, Tris, thank you so much for this. I know this is a hot topic. We had some great questions, and some of them can't be answered, but you still did an exceptional job of answering them. So thank you very much for that. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. And sorry, Ben, I will just say, if anyone wants to reach out to QuickClaim, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can reach us at hello@quickclaim.com.au, or jump on our website. You'll see there's some contact details. It's just quickclaim.com.au. You know, we'd love to answer any questions that you didn't get answered in this webinar, or if you just want to have a general chat about the NDIS.
Awesome. Again, thank you guys so much. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll wrap it up there. We'll do a recording for this that will be published to the ShiftCare YouTube channel, and we'll send it out to everyone that's registered. Awesome.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, mate. Yeah.